Hey, in this video, I'll show you how to use React Hook Form the right way. Client-side validation with proper error handling, server actions to process the form, and server-side validation that sends errors back to the form. By the end, you'll have a fully working setup. Let's jump into the code. First, I'll open the package.json file. I'm using Next.js 15 for this project. After that, I'll open a new terminal and run npm install React Hook Form, SOD, and Hook Form resolvers to install SOD and SOD resolver. With the dependencies installed, we can move on to the next section. But let's start the server first with npm run dev. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and close the terminal and bring back the file explorer. I'm going to create a types folder within source, and inside types let's create a new file called index.ts. Now I'll create a type for the form data called contact form data. It includes name, email, and message, all as strings. After creating the type, let's create a utils folder inside source. And now let's create a validation folder and add a new file, contact-schema.ts. Let's start by defining the SOD schema. First, import SOD from SOD. This is where we'll set up all the rules for our form inputs, required fields, email format, message length, and more. This schema will be used by React Hook Form to validate the form automatically. Additionally, we will use the same schema to validate the data on the server side, because you can't trust data coming from the front end. This C comes from the SOD library. C.object is a method provided by SOD to define a schema for an object. The keys in the object represent the fields you want to validate, and the values are the validation rules for each field. For example, C.string specifies that the field must be a string. Next, we'll connect this schema to React Hook Form. Let's keep going. Now I'm gonna go to source and create a components folder, and then I'm gonna create a forms folder inside components. Following that, I'm gonna create a contact form.tsx file inside the forms folder. Let's mark this component as a client component so we can enable React hooks and interactivity for the user. Let's define the contact form function and export it as a default export. And let's start by adding the structure of the component. First, I'll wrap everything inside a div. Next, I'll add an h1 element inside the div. Now let's add the actual form and the form fields. Inside our div, I'm going to add 3 input fields, one for the user's name, one for their email, and one for their message. I'll start with the name input, followed by the email and message fields. Each field will have an input or text area element for the user to enter their information. Finally, I'll add a submit button to allow the user to submit the form. Now, I'll open the page and remove the boilerplate code. I'm going to import the contact form and add it to the page. Now let's save the file, open the browser, and check how it looks. Back in VS Code, I'm going to open the contact form component and add the contact schema. Now I'm going to import useForm hook from React Hook Form and SOD resolver. Next, we need to add the useForm hook from React Hook Form. This will handle all the form functionality like validation and submission. From useForm, I'll grab register to register the input fields, handle submit to manage the form submission process, and set error to manually trigger form errors if needed. Additionally, reset allows us to reset the form after submission, and form state gives us access to the form errors and whether the form is currently being submitted. We'll also need to connect the SOD schema for validation using the SOD resolver. This is a utility provided by the Hook Form resolvers package that acts as a bridge between React Hook Form and SOD. We're using useForm contact form data which is important because it ties the form fields to the contact form data type we defined earlier. By providing the useForm hook with our contact form data type, React Hook Form can better understand the form and offer type safety throughout the process. If the registered fields are modified and don't match the types defined in contact form data, TypeScript will throw an error, making sure that we stay consistent with our types. Now let's connect the input fields to the useForm hook using register. But first, let's implement the onSubmit function that gets triggered when the form is submitted. For now, we're just going to log form data to the console. Next, I'm gonna scroll down to the form element and attach the onSubmit handler to the form by passing handle submit with our onSubmit function. This ensures that when the user submits the form, validation happens first, and then the form data is passed to the onSubmit function. After that, we register the name input field, the email, and the message text area. When you call register, it returns an object containing props that you can spread directly into your input fields. This includes properties like onChange, onBlur, and ref, which React Hook Form needs to track the field. In the submit button, I'm going to check if submitting is true or false, and display processing or submit. All we gotta do now is scroll up and import the contact form data type. Let's go to the browser and run a new test to see if it works. And yes, after submitting the form, we can see the data still being logged into the console. Now we'll handle displaying errors. React Hook Form stores validation errors in form state.errors. We can do this to show error messages below each input field. Let's see how we do that. Here's what's happening. Each input field is connected to the useForm hook via the register function. This allows React Hook Form to track changes, validate input, and manage their state. The register function takes the name of the field as an argument, which matches the keys in our source schema. Now we can see an error below the name input field when it's empty, or if there's a typo in the email field, or if the message is empty as well. Now I'm gonna create an actions folder within source. Then I create the process contact action.ts file. And so now we can start implementing our server action. I'm gonna add useServer at the top of the file. And then let's import contact form data from types, C from SOD, and contact schema from our validation schema. Then I'm gonna create an export a process contact action function. It's an async function and it accepts form data as a parameter, and it has a type of contact form data. And now I'm gonna log form data to the console and return success true and message contact data saved successfully. Okay, let's save the file and run another test. Time to check it in the browser. Let's submit the form and check if the data shows up in the terminal. Let's open the terminal, and there we can see our data. We have the name, the email, and the message. And back in VS Code, I'm going to add a try catch block. Now we're validating the form data using contact schema.parse. Note that parse will throw an error if validation fails. Let me show you an example with safe parse. Here's the deal. If you want to validate your data without throwing errors, safe parse is your friend. Unlike parse, which throws an error if something goes wrong, safe parse just gives you a result object and you can decide what to do with it. Let's get back to implementing our server action. We are passing the form data, and if everything checks out, you can save the data to the database or perform any other necessary action. If an error occurs, log it to the console and return a failure message. Let's test this by changing the name property to an empty string. And I'm also gonna add here the following comment. Now let's go back to the browser and submit the form. And if we open the terminal, we can see a validation error on the server side. Now let's pass this error to the client and display it to the user. I'm gonna close the terminal and go ahead and fix the name property. In the catch block, we're handling the validation errors from SOD. If an error occurs, we check if it's an instance of c.SOD_error. If it is, we use reduce to iterate over each issue in the error. And for each issue, we extract the field name and the corresponding error message. Finally, we return an object with a successful status, the errors object, and a message telling the user to fix the errors in the form. And now let's open the contact form and let's finish implementing the onSubmit function. Here, we're checking the response from the server. If the response is not successful, we first check if there are validation errors. If response.errors exists, we loop through each field and message using object.entries. For each error, we use setError to manually set the error for that field in the form. If there are no validation errors, but a generic error message exists, we display it with an alert. Then, stop further execution using return. If the response is successful, we display a success message with an alert and call reset to clear the form. Now let's go back to the browser and check our form. If we submit the form, we get an alert with a success message and the input fields get reset. And if we try to submit the form when the input fields are empty, we can see all the validation errors. And now I'm gonna go back to VS Code and change the name property to an empty string again, because I want to show the user a message when there is a validation error on the server side. And there we can see the error message being displayed under the input field. I'm gonna fix the name property again, and that's it for this video. Hope you found it useful. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Catch you in the next one.